What's going on, guys? So today we're going to be looking at question 16. And this is from the SAT number 9, April 2017 QAS test. And 16 says, what main effect do the words clueless and mind reading, lines 38 and 61, have on the tone of the passage? So here we have a somewhat rare question where we're asking about tone. And what I tell students is when the SAT is asking about tone, don't get too fancy with it. So basically, as far as I can see on the questions I've looked at, tone on the SAT sort of comes in two categories. You have generally a formal tone and an informal tone. Formal is the norm. It's what we expect from most SAT passages. And then informal are when we're using just more casual language that could be a little bit humorous, etc. So anytime we're asking about specific words and the effect of tone, I always try to put it into those two categories. Tone in the real world there's a lot of things going on with tone. You know, you could imagine like a box of crayons. You can have every kind of tone that you want. A skeptical tone. You can have a hopeful tone. You can have a derogatory tone. There's all kinds of tones. Just like if you have a box of crayons, you can have 24 or 100 plus different colors of whatever, you know, teal, sky blue. What I find is basically on the SAT, it's very black and white. It's formal and informal. I haven't seen this broken. If you can tell me, let me know. But for now, all I know is that it's formal and informal are kind of the two tones that we have. So when I first look at these words, I'm just asking myself, are these more formal or are these more informal? And my first thought is these are definitely more informal. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the angle the test is going to take, right? They may be trying to lead us in a different direction. But I'm going to keep that in my mind and be like, okay, I'm going to suspect that has something to do with being informal. But I'll also go back and just kind of check out what's going on. So in line 38, it is not perfect insight, but it is also very far from being clueless. And this is basically saying that we're talking about the correlation between what you think about yourself versus how groups perceive you. And he's like, you know, it's around 0.5, I think. Yep. And it's not perfect insight, right? We don't know perfectly how groups feel about us, but it's far from being clueless. Like, we know at least somewhat how people feel about us. And then we look at mind reading here in 61. This says, perhaps this is holding your mind reading abilities to too high a standard. And this is basically, we're taking a turn in the argument. This is after they talked about the fact that it's hard for us to understand how individuals perceive us. And then it's saying, you know, maybe we're just being too strict, too hard on ourselves. We're holding our mind reading abilities to too high a standard. Obviously, we're not talking about real mind reading abilities, but we're using this sort of as like a metaphor for understanding how people think about us. So at this point, I'm going to go through the answer choices, see if anything strikes me, but I'm still going to be on that kick of looking for something that's a little bit more informal. So we start with A. A says they contribute to a casual, good, and gently humorous tone that renders the potentially specialized discussion more approachable, basically meaning that we have this science passage, somewhat technical, and this makes it a little easier to read, right? It's casual and gently humorous. So humor on the SAT is another thing, which is, it's not very funny. It's very dry. It's very ironic. That's the extent of humor on this. The casual part kind of matches up what we said before about being informal. So I think this is a good answer choice. You should keep it. Then we have B, which says they contribute to a slyly mocking and disapproving tone. This is a little bit too sophisticated as far as I can tell, right? So far, we're talking about a mocking and disapproving tone, which one is a little bit too negative for what I would expect from an SAT passage, and a little too specific for the tone in a world where it's usually more likely that we're dealing with just formal and informal tone. But it says we have this kind of tone, and it's reinforcing the author's criticisms of the researcher's conclusions. This is really the part that I think makes this wrong, is that the author is not criticizing the researcher's conclusion. He kind of is a neutral third party, just giving the information from the experiment. If anything, he's probably supportive, mildly supportive, but definitely not critical. So we can get rid of B. Then we have C, which says they contribute to a deeply pessimistic tone that stresses the impossibility of ever knowing how people truly perceive each other. This is very strong and very negative, deeply pessimistic tone. We need a lot of evidence to prove that. And then here, the impossibility of ever knowing how people truly perceive each other doesn't really match up with what the text says. It says in a few places that we're actually okay at understanding how groups feel about us. We have a little bit of insight into how other individuals feel about us. So this is too strong, it's too negative, and it's not supported by the text. Then we have D, which says that these lines or these words contribute to a thoughtful yet uncertain tone. Okay, so maybe we're dealing with uncertainty, right? Mind reading and clueless, that casts doubt on the real world usefulness of experimental data. This is the part here that's wrong for me. This is basically saying that, look, this experimental data is not useful to the real world, which is a pretty unscientific worldview, I would say, not something I would expect to see on the SAT, and definitely not something that the passage makes. So we get rid of D. And that leaves us with answer choice A, which is our correct answer for question number 16.